Are you afraid? Afraid of life without drugs and alcohol? There is help and hope at Sundown M Ranch. At Sundown, the focus is on you and your disease. You will learn how to live without depending on drugs and alcohol. Sundown M Ranch is nationally recognized for effective and affordable alcohol and drug treatment programs. Reclaim your life. Replace your fears with hope. Go to www.sundown.org right now to learn more.
The bright side of addiction is recovery, and recovery is living proof. If you are in recovery or know or love someone who is, or you simply want to find out more about the recovery process, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone you know or love, well, this is the podcast for you, as we carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery. And a reminder, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. The story of Ryan Leaf today. An amazing story of football, real life, and lots of legal troubles and jail sentences. He was sentenced to multiple drug-related prison sentences for theft, burglary, and assorted drug charges. He was sentenced to 7 years from a judge in Montana, 5 years from a Texas judge. He finally found what eluded him for so very long, long-term recovery. Today, Ryan Leaf embraces long-term recovery like never before. He's back in football as an ESPN analyst and also speaks to college and NFL teams about addiction, recovery, and life after football. Here is a quick clip from today's podcast.
There was a point in the prison cell when I was able to look in the mirror and go, I'm here because of what I did. Nobody else. I couldn't blame the doctors. I couldn't blame the NFL. I couldn't blame the media. This is, what was my part in all of that?
Sure.
That's the accountability side of it that I don't think I ever really, truly accepted and surrendered to. So that was probably that moment. And then the understanding that what the judge had kind of said, I'd never been marginalized in my life. And the judge pretty much said, you have no value to society. I'm going to give you a number. I'm going to warehouse you.
You'll hear a lot more from Ryan Leaf in just a couple of minutes. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast, and I want to begin the podcast by expressing once again my sincere thank you to you and deep gratitude to you for listening to the podcast. There's a lot of podcasts out there. I know that. You can spend a lot of time listening to a lot of them. I appreciate the fact that you're listening to this one. I thank you for listening. Our website, by the way, is recoverycoasttocoast.org. You find all of our podcasts there. And following 15 years of nightly broadcasting on iHeartRadio in Seattle, our podcast features interviews with everyday people in recovery, as well as clinicians, authors, and recovering celebrities who offer the promise of hope and the reality of recovery, plus well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy the podcast and to, hopefully, share it with your friends. Recovery is an American way of life. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, and we would love to hear from you, our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. Now, as a friend of mine likes to say, treatment doesn't cost, it saves. He's been sober over 20 years, and he's a big advocate of treatment. And he's right about the savings. It saves lives, families, it saves careers, it saves friendships, and so much more. Treatment really is life-saving, but it's not free. Now, fortunately, most insurance plans cover most of the costs of treatment. And fortunately, Sundown M Ranch has some of the lowest rates in the country. Why? Well, because number one, they are a nonprofit organization built around the fact that the patient is the reason they are there. plain and simple. They are not owned by a corporation. They're not focused on a bottom line. For Sundown, the bottom line is patient recovery. Always has been since 1968. They are not part of a chain of treatment centers. There's only one Sundown M Ranch. Secondly, Sundown owns their own land, some 30 acres at the mouth of the beautiful Yakima River Canyon, not far from Seattle. Owning their own land keeps their cost down, and in this day and age, the land increases in value. Number three, they take most major insurance, and the cost of treatment is all-inclusive as they strive to provide affordable care as well as excellent treatment for the treatment of alcoholism and other drug dependencies. They also work with one of healthcare's leading financial organizations called Prosper to assist in funding treatment. You can find out more about this on their website. Patients will know the estimated upfront costs of what their insurance is expected to cover. And the objective here is to allow the patient to focus on healing, while the expert staff at Sundown, they work with the insurance company to maximize your benefits. All of this strictly confidential. If someone says they can't afford to go to treatment, ask them this: can they afford not to go to treatment? Addiction is a serious disease that often needs medical and psychological intervention. Sundown has helped nearly 200,000 people find their way into recovery, one patient at a time. If you find yourself looking for a treatment center, definitely do your research, but definitely consider Sundown M Ranch, located again just outside of Seattle, where recovery begins. Sundown.org is their website. I invite you to join me now for a cup of coffee and an amazing conversation with a guy who was the number 2 pick right behind Peyton Manning back in that 1998 NFL draft. Sadly, his NFL career was a bust, drenched in alcohol and many other drugs. And his post-NFL life, that was even worse, doing hard time in a Montana prison for theft, burglary, and a variety of drug charges. Every chance he was given, he squandered. Eventually, he found his way into active recovery. He now carries his message of hope and the promise of recovery. He recovers out loud. I caught up with Ryan down in Texas. Welcome back once again to Recovery Coast to Coast. Great to have you with us. We're taking you on the road down to the 43rd Annual TAP Conference in San Antonio, Texas. TAP is the Texas Association of Addiction Professionals. Joining us in this segment is one of the keynote speakers here at the conference, and it's a guy who's been on Recovery Coast to Coast before, and there's a story behind that. It was back on March 15th of 2012. Ryan Leaf came into the studio and the KJR studios, and we spent probably about an hour, and he was talking recovery, and he had me convinced that he was well, and actually he was well on his way to a prison sentence. And of course, the rest is history until the 3rd of December in 2014, when Ryan Leaf started a new life outside of prison. Ryan, welcome back, and I mean welcome back in the global sense, because you were right at the end.
Yeah, I was about 2 weeks away from being arrested when I was on your show. I remember immediately after your show going to an urgent care center in Seattle to score pills. So
Wow.
It was the epitome of a hypocrite. As we learn from many who go to rehab and go to rehab and go to rehab, we are able to take what we hear and apply it to our manipulation tactics. I was in the process of selling a book. I was trying to give everybody the perception that everything was okay, which is old behavior for me.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the best place, but I was able to pretend like I was. And I was able to do that for a while.
Yeah, you certainly were. And one of the things we did after that interview was I said, do you speak? And you said yes. And I booked you for a conference in Yakima, Washington. It's going to come full circle here, because it was the night of the 30th when I got a text from Scott Munson up at Sundown. And he said, so I guess we need another speaker, huh? I said, what are you talking about? He says, didn't you hear Ryan was arrested? And I texted you, and you texted me back and said, it's not what it appears to be. It's a misunderstanding. It can all be resolved. Stay tuned. And so on Monday, I went into KJR where I do sports updates. Jason Puckett, who you probably know, and he said to me, "Did you hear what happened to Ryan Leaf yesterday?" I said, "Well, I've been in touch with him. There's some other circumstances. He's going to get back to me." And I said, "It wasn't yesterday. It was Friday." He said, "No, it was Friday and yesterday." And then I reached out to you and was in touch with your attorney, and we tried to get you a bed at sundown. But by that time, the horse was out of the barn, and you were on your way to prison.
Yep.
Looking back on that, there was a suicide attempt, or close to a suicide attempt, and you said you asked God for help, and God sent the sheriff.
Yeah, it feels like it was a lifetime ago, to be honest with you. But it was only it's only 5.5 years ago. So it's important to remember that a day like that's capable of happening tomorrow. If I'm not, working on today, working on this
Absolutely.
minute. So that's it's a good reminder. And when life seems to be going pretty well, it's always a good slap in the face to remind you of what's out there.
When did you have the moment of clarity? You went to prison. I know you had a roommate that kicked your ass and said you got to do service work and you got to help these other prisoners learn how to read. But when did it really click in for you? When was that moment of clarity?
Well, I don't necessarily know when it was. I think there was a point in the prison cell when I was able to look in the mirror and go, I'm here because of what I did. Nobody else. I couldn't blame the doctors. I couldn't blame the NFL. I couldn't blame the media. This is, what was my part in all of that?
Sure.
That's the accountability side of it that I don't think I ever really truly accepted and surrendered to. So that was probably that moment. And then the understanding that what the judge had kind of said, I'd never been marginalized in my life. And the judge pretty much said, you have no value to society. I'm going to give you a number. I'm going to warehouse you. And the most fearful thing was while in prison, I kind of accepted that until, like you said, my roommate got on me about the value I actually did have. And it had nothing to do with football or even the fact that I had messed up before. That's something you can't fix. And so I'd probably say that was the point. But when he asked me to go work with those guys, it wasn't like it was an epiphany that happened. It was the progress part. Before I knew it, it was 3 or 4 months later, and we were doing more work. I probably at the time was walking down the hallway with him, just probably cussing him underneath my breath because I was, why would I be doing this type of thing.
Any sort of treatment in prison? Any 12-step meetings? Any involvement in that part?
They're available, but they were very. Prison is not a healthy environment to rehabilitate. You have to make a conscious choice at some point to change by yourself. You're not getting the help in there. I did because of my roommate. That was the blessing that God placed in front of me there. But
you were in prison in Montana,
right?
Yeah.
So what I did in prison is I self-loathed and laid in my bed for 32 months. Went outside twice. I didn't do anything. I was.
Why only twice? Was that by command?
Well, I went out on April 10th. The first time I got there, and I just looked around and I saw the mountains I hunted in. I saw the rivers I fished in, and all I could see through them were this barbed wire, and the depression of it all and that's what prison is. They give you a little TV and they put you in a room and they babysit you that way, and like I said, they warehouse you. It's another society.
Second time you went outside, you played a little football, and you gave back to a young man. Tell me about that.
Well, they asked me to play their flag football game and play all-time quarterback, and I did. And it was also a moment for me to realize that this had nothing to do with me. I thought it was all about me when it was all over because it was such a spectacle. The guards started standing around and people started talking about it, and the shame of it for me was overwhelming. But then the young man who walked into my room later that night said it was his birthday and he got to play catch with me, and it made his year. And a person who is so narcissistic, I looked at it like, you're right, it did. Everybody should feel that way. But instead, it had a different feeling. I kind of put myself on the back burner and realized this wasn't about me. But I still didn't do it again. I mean, like I said, it's progress. I didn't go outside again or play with these guys again. Or if they asked, I'd say, hell no.
Yeah. What do you use as your sobriety birth date?
April 1st, 2012.
Yes.
You saw March 30th. I was arrested
That's right.
that night,
And the second one was on April Fool's Day.
Yeah, April Fool's Day is when I got out. I looked at the sheriffs when I was walking out, and I said, "This had to have been the most dramatic April Fool's joke I've ever been a part of."
My goodness. Ryan Leaf is joining us in Recovery Coast to Coast. Addiction affects everyone. It affects families. It affected your family greatly in Montana. Talk about the other side of that. Now you're sober. You're in a long-term recovery situation. You are an ambassador for a wonderful treatment program called Transcend. We just talked to Joni Ogle just a few minutes ago about the program. What is your family? How do they feel now about the new Ryan Leaf?
Well, I think they both say they're very proud. I still have a hard time hearing my parents say that, or most people give me compliments. My default setting usually is less than, so that's where I tend to go. Or when I hear criticism, I usually think like, oh yeah, that's about right. So to hear that from them, it's sometimes difficult to hear because of knowing what I put them through. But I can tell you that, the last 2.5 years, the peace and I say serenity, the stress level has just been lowered to a point where they are enjoying themselves. They're really enjoying themselves now because I'm about to give them a grandson here in about
that wouldn't
5
happen
weeks.
To be MacGyver, would it?
Yeah. So they're very excited about that because that's all they've ever wanted. They had 3 boys. They figured they'd have grandchildren out the wazoo right now, but
up the wazoo.
Yeah,
up the wazoo.
Yeah.
I got it. Okay. Tell me about meeting Anna.
Well, it was on my brother's TV set, and she just happened to be there on a day that I actually wasn't because my brother wanted me to come watch him work, and I didn't have enough money to pay for gas to go watch it. And he got on the phone with me and said, "I'll pay for your gas. Just come up and watch me work." And I said, "Okay." And I went up, and there she was. We just started talking. She was working as an actress on his set that day. We talked during her breaks. I gave her my phone number when she left. I mean, the rest is history. I still haven't seen that gas money though. but I guess it was an even trade-off to find the love of my life on that day.
Ryan Leaf joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast. Tell me about the first 72 hours when you left prison. What was that like for you?
It was amazing how you could be in shackles literally 20 seconds before, and they unhook you, and you just walk out and step into mom and dad's car. It just the surreal moment of it all. And then I was in the car, and we're driving back, and I've said this before. I didn't know what was going to happen. I had hope, and I knew I needed treatment. And when I went and asked my PO about it, he looked at me like I was crazy because, guys, he said, don't walk out of a prison cell and ask to go to treatment. So we had to wait 90 days for the red tape to get cut through for me to find the place in Southern California.
NFL help you out with that?
They did. I didn't have the money to pay for treatment, so if it weren't for the grants available to me as a former NFL player, and I also cashed in a life insurance policy, I wouldn't have been able to afford the treatment that I needed.
And then you get out of the treatment center, and then it's sober living. Tell me about that transition and what that meant to your recovery.
Well, I actually stayed in the inpatient for 90 days. They have a tier 2 part of it where you have more.
You went to Promises, right?
I did, where they have more liberties, and that's when I started working for Transcend as a driver. And having been home at night to check in and still go through some, I guess, essentially outpatient facilities and outpatient classes while in an inpatient facility. And then after that, to stay in California, I needed a place to live, and I got another job as a night manager at a sober living house where I got to live on the premises, and my shift was from 11 at night till 8 in the morning. And I did this for it was almost 8 months. Before I moved on, and they asked me to be their program ambassador.
When you were working that overnight shift, you had to give up medications. You had to give out drugs.
Yeah.
Tell me about what that was like for you the first time you had to do that.
Well, it wasn't so hard until the first time there was an opiate involved. The
Ugh.
the idea that it was right in front of me, it was weird. I looked at it and thought, the addict mind goes to, I could do this and no one would maybe know, or likely addict mind did for me for years and years and years. But as soon as I got through it and got over it, the chemical had been out of my body for a long time. It was the behavioral shifts that had to change. And that was being honest. I went to my supervisor and told him I feel uncomfortable doing this. I don't necessarily believe that we should have opiates in a sober living environment anyway. They modified it to where I didn't have to hand those pills out. I mean, that's significant behavior change for me, because I would just before not say anything, or in my mind it would be weakness before of saying, like, I can't handle this. Well, I know for a fact I can't handle this and I need help because of it.
What's recovery like today for Ryan Leaf?
It's peaceful and unchaotic is probably the best word. I don't like to necessarily say, I don't say happy, because life's life. I think that I'm not here to tell everybody how great Ryan Leaf's doing. Life's tough. I got a fiance that's 7.5 months pregnant right now, and I have to be very, very careful on how I word stuff and how we're going about things, because what women go through is pretty amazing. I'm learning all this, and I don't feel like I've done anything over the last 9 months. But it's about to change even more significantly. And as cliche as it sounds, I use it all the time. Life isn't fair. It's just simply how you deal with it that matters.
How you deal with it, exactly. Ryan Leaf joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast. You're involved with Focused Intensity Foundation. Tell me about that.
Well, it was something I started actually in 2011. I wanted to raise money for scholarships for people who couldn't afford substance abuse or mental health treatment. And I, of course, relapsed and got in trouble. But my father, he knew it was a great cause, and he knew that at some point, hopefully his son would be in the right place to run it. And he kept it alive while I was in prison.
Wow.
He paid the lawyer's fees. He paid the certification. He kept it going, and to a point where he was the biggest donor for 5 years essentially, and until I was ready to take it over, and we've done pretty amazing things already. I mean, we had $500 in the coffers when we walked into the Ellen show in March, and she kind of blew the top off it and what we were capable of doing, and overwhelmed us a bit, gave us $10,000, and we've been able to help. We've had three people now go through our process. So
that's great.
Hopefully we're really good at treating people. We're really novices at fundraising. So we're asking the right people and taking suggestions on how to do that, because we want to help as many people as we can. Because like we talked about before, if the NFL didn't exist for me on that, I wouldn't have been able to get the treatment. And I don't want anybody who honestly wants the treatment not to be able to get it because they simply can't afford it.
When we had that interview on the 15th of March back in 2012, after the interview was over, I booked you for a conference in Yakima, firmly believing that you were solid in your recovery. And Scott Munson from Sundown M Ranch called me and said, I guess we need another speaker. Well, now it's come full circle, because I've booked you in Yakima, Washington, at that conference. Full circle.
Yeah, it's full circle. I didn't necessarily think that I wanted to be very public about it when I finally got this thing. But my mentors, who live very public lives in a sober way, in a humble way, told me that this is what you have to do.
Giving back.
Yeah, it's you have to. Otherwise, your humility doesn't exist. Actually, your accountability doesn't exist, and your spirituality certainly doesn't exist. So,
what role does spirituality play in your recovery?
Well, it's one of the three pillars for me. It definitely is, because the understanding that I'm not. There's something much bigger than me out there. The idea that I'm not the one in control ever.
Yeah.
It's a big undertaking to understand that for someone who actually probably thought he was a god for a long, long time.
Yeah. I have so many more things I want to ask you, but we have a luncheon to go to. I'm the MC. You're the keynote speaker. I'm hoping that you might commit to coming into the KJR studios again when you're in Seattle. We can do a longer interview.
I'll be in there in October. I'm working with a group called Battlefield or Battleground Addiction. They work with families specifically. I'm speaking at their fundraiser in October, I believe.
In Seattle?
Yes, in Seattle.
Well, let's make a commitment to come into the studio. You got it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that conversation with former college football all-star, who is now a recovery all-star, carrying the message of hope and the promise of recovery. On April 1st, he celebrated 11 years in long-term recovery. And by the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you would like to share your story of recovery, regardless of the path you've chosen, as long as you've been in continuous recovery for a year or more, please drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Coming up next, actress Julie Harries talks about blessings in recovery. And we'll do that in just 30 seconds.
Are you afraid? Afraid of life without drugs and alcohol? There is help and hope at Sundown M Ranch. At Sundown, the focus is on you and your disease. You will learn how to live without depending on drugs and alcohol. Sundown M Ranch is nationally recognized for effective and affordable alcohol and drug treatment programs. Reclaim your life. Replace your fears with hope. Go to www.sundown.org right now to learn more.
And now, as promised, here is actress Julie Harries reflecting on blessings in recovery.
In certain moments, a single, almost insignificant sorrow may, by association, bring together all the little relics of pain and discomfort, bodily and mental, that we have endured even from infancy. Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Occasionally we experience something that returns us instantly to the old life and the way it used to be. The experience need not be a jolting one with wailing sirens and flashing red lights, or even a sad one. A long-forgotten odor, a musical phrase or other sound, perhaps the closing of a door, can cause that sense of déjà vu, transporting us back to the state of desperation from which we truly believed there could be no escape. When the sensation passes and we return to the present, are we filled with deep and almost overflowing gratitude for the lives we lead today? Do we thank God for reminding us of what it used to be like and for the way it is now? Let us pause and savor the moment, reflecting on the blessings we have been given. Let us vow to pass our gifts to others, for we have learned that we cannot keep them unless we give them away. Thought for today: remember the way it used to be, and be thankful for today.
Well, that wraps up this edition of the national podcast, Recovery Coast to Coast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends. I'd really appreciate that. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Again, our email address, if you'd like to get in touch, recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. And remember, if you know someone who's experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here is that 24-hour national helpline. It's free. It offers information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals, they are available as well. 1-800-622-HELP. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout-out to our sponsoring agency, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. Sundown.org. Special thanks to Ryan Leaf for sharing his experience, strength, and hope. And I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.